In 2013, Linus Torvalds, the man who built the operating system that powers most of the internet, sat down at his keyboard and wrote one of the most specific warnings of his career. He wasn't writing about Linux, he was writing about Microsoft and about a quiet move to make every PC on the planet require Microsoft's blessing before it could boot. His words were blunt, as they always are. He said it really shouldn't be about MS blessings. It should be about the user controlling their own machine. Now fast forward to 2024. Microsoft announced a feature called Recall for Windows 11, a tool that takes screenshots of your screen every few seconds, captures everything you've ever done on your computer, and makes it all searchable. A former Microsoft security researcher called it the equivalent of stealing everything you'd ever typed or viewed on your PC with 2 lines of code. Torvalds made specific and documented warnings about Microsoft's strategy of embedding control inside what looks like convenience or security. He then softened his position, and that softening, in hindsight, may have been premature. Because the pattern he described is not only still alive, it has moved directly into your living room. During the US government's antitrust case against Microsoft in 1999, internal memos were submitted as evidence. They revealed that the company had an internal policy for dealing with competitive threats, embrace an open standard everyone uses, extend it with proprietary features that only work inside Microsoft's ecosystem, and eventually, the original open standard gets squeezed out. Separately, a set of internal documents that came to be called the Halloween documents was leaked to open source advocate Eric S. Raymond. They showed that Microsoft engineers privately acknowledged that Linux and open source development were a serious threat, and discussed strategies to counter it. The same year those memos were in court, Torvalds was quietly building the alternative. And his philosophy was exactly the opposite of Microsoft's: build everything in the open, keep the governance in the community, and make it structurally impossible for any one company to own it. He put it plainly in an interview, in Real Open Source: "You have the right to control your own destiny." That sentence is the whole argument in 8 words. And it matters because the pattern of the 1990s, embrace what's open, then slowly build in the dependencies, never actually stopped. It just became harder to see. In June 2001, Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer gave an interview to the Chicago Sun-Times. He said Linux was a cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense to everything it touches. That statement was strategically stupid. It galvanized the open source community and handed Linux years of publicity. But strip away the rhetoric and the actual argument underneath it is revealing. Microsoft was terrified of a world where software that anyone could see, modify, and redistribute became the default. Because in that world, Microsoft's leverage over users disappears. Alongside the rhetoric came real actions. Microsoft backed SCO Group's copyright lawsuits against Linux vendors in the early 2000s. It quietly pressured Android device makers into patent licensing deals without ever publicly specifying which patents Linux supposedly violated. The strategy wasn't to out-engineer Linux. It was to make the legal and commercial environment around Linux uncomfortable enough that businesses would stick with Windows. Torvalds watched all of this and didn't respond with ideology. He responded with structure. Keep the kernel governed by the community. Make the GPL license the guarantee that no company, Microsoft, or anyone else could ever take it proprietary. The code itself was the defense. In 2012, Microsoft announced that Windows 8 certified PCs would require UEFI Secure Boot to be enabled by default. On the surface, this sounded like a security feature, prevent unauthorized software from running before the operating system loads. But the practical effect was that booting Linux on new hardware became complicated because Microsoft controlled which keys were trusted by the firmware. If a Linux distribution wanted to run on Windows 8 hardware out of the box, it needed either to get its bootloader signed with a Microsoft-approved key or find a workaround. Red Hat decided to solve the problem by getting their bootloader signed through a Microsoft-controlled process. When Red Hat developers proposed adding code to the Linux kernel to support this arrangement, Torvalds exploded. On the Linux kernel mailing list in February 2013, he wrote that the proposal was fucking moronic. He said it was designed around stupid interfaces for completely moronic reasons. Then he stated the principle directly: it really shouldn't be about MS blessings, it should be about the user blessing kernel modules. He said signing keys should be per machine, per user, not dependent on some crazy root of trust based on a big company. Around the same time, at LinuxCon Brazil, Torvalds made a broader version of the same argument. Technologies that lock things down tend to lose in the end, he said, because people want freedom and markets want freedom. This was not vague open source philosophy. This was Torvalds saying, in explicit terms, Microsoft is building a technical architecture where it controls the conditions under which your computer can run software. And if we let that happen, users lose. That warning was specific. It was documented. And the scenario it described has since expanded far beyond bootloaders. Then, Microsoft changed CEOs, and something genuinely shifted. Under Satya Nadella, Microsoft started contributing code to the Linux kernel, primarily to support Azure, which by the mid-2020s was running more Linux workloads than Windows ones. It joined the Open Invention Network. It open-sourced parts of .NET. In 2018, it acquired GitHub for $7.5 billion. And in 2019, Torvalds himself gave the new Microsoft a public pass. At the Linux Plumbers Conference, he said the anti-Microsoft sentiment was just a funny joke that had run its course. He talked to Microsoft engineers at conferences, he said, and they're really happy working on Linux. This was the most significant thing Torvalds could have said. For years, he had been the leading technical voice articulating why Microsoft's relationship with open software was structurally adversarial. Now he was saying it wasn't. And here's the honest part: the contributions were real. Microsoft's open source engagement under Nadella wasn't theater. The Linux kernel work, the Azure investment, and the developer tools, these weren't a facade. But Torvalds' pragmatic view had a gap in it. And it's the same gap that makes the UEFI secure boot warning still relevant today. Individual engineers can genuinely love Linux. Corporate contributions can be genuine. And a company can simultaneously, through platform control and product design, rebuild the same leverage over users that the embrace extend pattern was always designed to create, just more slowly and with better PR. The GitHub acquisition is the clearest example of what that gap looks like in practice. When Microsoft bought GitHub in 2018, developers immediately worried about what a Microsoft-owned GitHub would mean for the open source ecosystem. For several years, those fears seemed unfounded. Microsoft left GitHub largely alone. Then came GitHub Copilot, an AI coding assistant trained on the billions of lines of code stored in GitHub repositories, including enormous amounts of open source code contributed under licenses that were never designed to feed a commercial AI product. The Software Freedom Conservancy publicly called out the intellectual property concerns and stopped using GitHub entirely over it. A class action lawsuit was filed. The legal questions are still unresolved. But step back and look at the structure of what happened. Microsoft acquired the dominant platform where open source code lives. It used that position to train a subscription AI product. The open source community that built GitHub's value became, without being asked, the raw material for a commercial service. That is the extended phase. Not hostile, not illegal necessarily, but a recognizable move using centralized control of a shared resource to generate proprietary value. Torvalds had named this exact dynamic in 2013. He said Microsoft's control over secure boot signing keys was about building a root of trust based on a big company, meaning trust flows from Microsoft downward, not from users upward. The GitHub to Copilot pipeline is structurally identical. Trust in the platform, accumulated over years, converted into a proprietary product. Nothing illustrates the endpoint of this trajectory quite like Windows Recall. On May 20th, 2024, Microsoft announced Recall as the flagship feature of its Copilot plus PC lineup. The pitch: your PC would take a screenshot every few seconds, process it with on-device AI, and let you search your entire computing history in plain English. Within days of the announcement, security researcher Kevin Beaumont, a former senior threat intelligence analyst at Microsoft itself, published a post demonstrating that everything Recall captured was stored in an unencrypted SQLite database on the device. His headline stated that stealing everything a user had ever typed or viewed was possible with 2 lines of code. Privacy researchers noted that Recall had no content filtering. Passwords, credit card numbers, private messages, and confidential documents, if they appeared on the screen, Recall captured it. Wired's Andy Greenberg described the original implementation as unrequested, pre-installed spyware built into new Windows computers. The UK's Information Commissioner's Office opened a formal investigation. Microsoft pulled the launch. They made the feature opt-in, added encryption, required biometric authentication to access Recall data, and rolled it out slowly through Windows Insider channels in 2025. Microsoft did respond to the criticism. The revised architecture is meaningfully more secure than what was first announced. But that is not the point. The point is what the original design reveals about assumptions. A feature that silently records everything on your screen, turned on by default, stored in plain text, never publicly tested before announcement, treats the user's computing environment as Microsoft's data to collect, organize, and make useful. The framing is your photographic memory. The reality of the first design was closer to what Torvalds described in 2013, a root of trust based on a big company, where the company decides what happens on your machine. Torvalds said in 2013 that it really shouldn't be about MS blessings. It should be about the user blessing. In 2024, Microsoft shipped a feature that blessed itself with access to everything the user had ever done on their computer and called it a gift. Torvalds was right that the Microsoft of 2019 was genuinely different from the Microsoft that called Linux a cancer. The engineers are real, the kernel contributions are real, Azure's Linux investment is real, none of that was theater. What the softening underweighted is the distinction between individual intent and structural incentive. Microsoft engineers working on the Linux kernel can be completely sincere, and Microsoft as a corporation can still design Windows to capture your screen every 5 seconds by default. Those two things are not in contradiction. One is about people, the other is about a business model. Torvalds' most enduring warning wasn't actually about Microsoft's intentions. It was about architecture. He said in 2013 that security and trust should flow from users, not from big companies. He said lockdown technologies, those that put a company between the user and their own machine, are ultimately on the wrong side of how technology evolves. That architectural argument didn't expire when Nadella said Microsoft loves Linux. It became harder to see. But Recall brought it back into focus. Linus Torvalds made a specific, documented warning in 2013 that building a technical architecture where Microsoft controls the conditions under which your computer operates is a fundamental problem. Not because Microsoft is uniquely evil, but because that kind of centralized control is wrong in principle, regardless of who holds it. He then, in 2019, concluded that Microsoft had changed enough that the warning no longer applied. And for a while, that seemed reasonable. But the pattern he described in 2013 didn't stop. It migrated. From bootloaders to code repositories to AI training data to your screen history. The mechanism got more sophisticated, the pitch got friendlier. The underlying move, position a big company between users and their own computing environment, stayed the same. He said technologies that lock things down tend to lose in the end because people want freedom. That may still be true in the long run. But in the short run, those technologies ship pre-installed on hundreds of millions of machines. And most people never notice until it's inconvenient to leave. If this made you think differently about what's running on your machine right now, go check your recall settings. Look at your telemetry options. Know what's on by default. And drop a comment. Do you think Torvalds was right to soften his position in 2019? Or did he read the situation wrong? I'm genuinely curious where you land on that.